All right, cool. Before we talk about Robert Greene, we want to do a little bit of housekeeping about this podcast. So Matt and I, when we first started this a couple months ago, said that we are going to do 10 episodes, and then we were going to go get a bangin' lunch at Gramercy Tavern. And this is actually a move in New York City, is that you go to all the Michelin star restaurants for lunch because they're really cheap, but they try to get you hooked, so they still have like some good stuff on the menu.
Tasting menu.
Yeah. It's a great move. So we went to Gramercy Tavern and decided that we were going to commit to doing 10 more of these episodes. So anyone that is listening and getting value out of this podcast, that's awesome. You got 10 more episodes. So we were on hiatus for the last month. We were in Eastern Europe. We went to the Ethereum Developers Conference at DevCon in Prague, and then spent the next 3 weeks after that kind of traveling around, seeing some stuff. What do you think of DevCon? I asked you that.
My general thought on DevCon was it brought into sharp focus for me the dearth of real activity in the Ethereum ecosystem, the noob-ishness of all the projects, and just, it's interesting. Whenever I do anything, it's always that I will meet somebody who's doing that thing, and then I'll think, this guy's a total noob, I could totally do that as well. And so for instance, like whenever I was a kid, I wanted to join this wrestling team, and then there was this guy on it, and I thought to myself, that guy's a total noob, I could completely do this, and then I did it. And I felt the same way, so I had read about all these projects, and then they seem so much cooler when you're reading about them online and you meet the actual people, and you're like, noob, I could totally do that. So I found it inspirational in that way. That, to me,
in the
is
sense
inspiring.
that you thought that now you can commit more code and take more strategic steps to being involved with cryptocurrency stuff?
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
cool.
yeah.
I actually got something maybe worth talking about out of it. This was the third developers conference I've been to. I was at the last two, and it's so interesting. Like, to me, one of the main things that I got from being at this conference is that Ethereum, and maybe even cryptocurrencies in general, are just almost more of a cultural movement than a technological movement at this point. Just this vibe, man, at these conferences is so interesting. It reminds me, because we talked a couple of episodes ago about the hippie movement in San Francisco in the 1960s and just how interesting of a time that must have been. And it feels like there's something like that happening now. But instead of happening in San Francisco, it's in Berlin. Like, Berlin is the epicenter of this hippie 2.0 movement. And it involves Burning Man and just this really interesting loss of faith in institutions that had served the entire 20th century. And this kind of rebirth in some capacity, of which cryptocurrency is somewhat of a technological underpinning of. And it's just so interesting that every time you go to these and you just feel the energy and try to interpret it and try to make sense of what's going to become of all of it. Because most people believe that the hippie movement failed in its main aims of, peace and unity and love. But now we have the internet, and now we have, a much more solid, basis for it. So I really thought it was just interesting to take in kind of talking to people that are living in Berlin, that are working on cryptocurrencies, their perspective on what this whole movement means, more so than any like specific technological thing that I got out of it. But I don't know. These conferences are awesome. I highly encourage anyone, if you're interested in this whole like cultural movement that's going on around cryptocurrencies, the Ethereum Developers Conference is like the place to be, I think.
It was a great side event to RaveCon 0.
Yeah, that's part of it. So for just RaveCon was like a side party that happened at DevCon that was way more of a legit rave than I would have ever suspected.
It was fire. It was very good.
Yeah, the music so I had this thought when we were listening to music there that this kind of like dance music in Europe is almost like abstract art, in the sense that, so Matt and I are starting a band, and like we have a band coach, and we go every Tuesday and we play music, and he like tries to like scope everything we're doing to this like really strict format where he'll be like, okay, you guys need 4 bars of the chorus, and then you need to do 4 measures of the verse, and then a bridge, and then the chorus. And it's this really constrained way to think about a song.
I always think of it as formulaic.
Yeah, it's a formulaic way to create motion and ideas, because the core concepts are there. Like, you need a verse, and then you need to change a pace into a chorus that has maybe more tempo, and then a bridge bridges the gap between something and something. Like, these are core concepts. But this idea behind like this dance music, that is like this EDM stuff, is that you can basically abstract that all into drum beats. So you can say, I'm just going to use drum beats and I'm going to make the verse and I'm going to make the chorus and the bridge. But just by doing that in drums alone gives you so much more space for the rest of the song, and you have so many more interesting ideas to experiment with. So I've always found electronic music interesting in that sense. But the music that we were listening to in Europe was so interesting because it was almost more aggressive and somehow darker than the music that's in the US. So you'd go to these dance clubs and they would just be this super crazy abstract, like just drums, and these haunted sounds like, oh, like going on. And yeah, it was awesome. Like, I feel it's like kind of going to Paris in the 1920s and like seeing the art movement that was there and then coming back to the US, like, we should apply some of this stuff somehow.
Yeah, totally. What I love about electronic music and house music is that it's so international. And it's because it has no lyrics. So people in every country, youth culture in every country is into it. Or anyway, the youth culture that I'm interested in every country. So that's to me amazing that young people in Beijing or in New York or Los Angeles or Berlin or Tokyo can all vibe out to really crazy house music. And in this way, it gets into what Robert Greene was talking about how generations are more cohesive intergenerationally, even across countries these days, than between the different generations, which is, I guess, something that we can talk about a little bit later. But
yeah, that's an awesome point when he talks about how generations across countries are more cohesive than the same nationality but different generations.
Yeah.
But we'll get to Robert Greene in a second because I wanted to talk a little bit, just really quickly recap your thoughts on Eastern Europe, because I had never been to Eastern Europe before and I found it so interesting. So the developers conference was in Prague, which is a very interesting choice. They always have these things. So like the Ethereum DevCon 2 is in Shanghai, and I thought that was such an interesting idea because almost nobody would think it's a good idea to have a tech conference in China. It's just, like if you were going to have some, SaaS conference, everyone would be like, oh, do it in San Francisco or maybe Las Vegas where there's big convention centers. If you said you're going to do it in China, people think you're crazy because, you can't like live stream, from China, for example. But they just had their developers conference in Shanghai because they just didn't care, and I thought it was so interesting. But what do you think of Prague as the location and just the city in general?
it was interesting for me personally because in 2008, I first went there for a study abroad program in college, and it was the first place outside of the United States, really, that I ever traveled to. I'd been to the BVI, but that's basically the United States. And so when I found out, I didn't even know what was Prague. I had to Google it. And this was kind of the beginning of my just formulation of my own self as my own person, going to college and all this. And now, 10 years later, I went back to Prague. So it was for me really interesting to be there and to think about the person that I was then and the person that I am now. And so that was really cool.
I thought it was interesting. Like, the thing you notice about Prague immediately, like one of our friends had this line where he's like, Prague is goth as fuck. And I knew exactly what he meant when he said that because there's just these gothic style churches everywhere. So I guess that they surrendered in all the wars, so they never got bombed in World War I or World War II. And because of that,
People didn't really do bombing in World War I.
Yeah, I guess
bombing was a World War II thing.
I guess that's true. But their city is still intact. So they have like all the 12th century, whatever architecture.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. It's like you don't see cathedrals like this really in the U.S.
There are almost none.
Yeah, so I thought that was cool. There's a lot of spires. They call it like the city of thousand spires or whatever. Also, like every woman in Eastern Europe is very attractive, which I also think is interesting because my theory on this that I've told you before is that in World War II, the Eastern Front was just such a slaughterhouse that probably at least half of the adult male population of Eastern Europe was killed in some capacity. And because of this, like think about the people that came back from World War II that like they're going to go now, they have to create their population of their home country, which was eradicated in this war. Only half the guys survived, but most of the women survived because they weren't fighting in combat for the most part. Although in Russia on the Eastern Front they were, but for the most part they weren't. So they're only going to have kids with the most attractive women that are in Eastern Europe. So it's basically, after World War II, is an extinction event for like half the population that are on like the left side of the bell curve in attractiveness. So that's my theory on why everyone's attracted there. But I don't know if
Yeah.
that's scientifically accurate, but it makes sense to me.
I don't really know. I always found that Russian girls were really attractive. I think it's because it's kind of a melange of ethnicities somehow. Like, I always find that is an attractive feature, you know?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Because it introduces genetic diversity into the gene pool, makes your progeny more resilient to
So you're saying just the history of Russia just incorporated a bunch of
Yeah.
different... That also could be it too. Or my World War II theory.
I have no idea.
We have to look at some pictures from like 1890 or whatever.
Yeah, who knows?
But anyway, so we were in Prague, and we had this trip set up to go afterwards to Budapest, Bratislava, and Vienna. But Matt was in Prague dealing with some hackathon for the Java Ethereum client. So I had a couple days to myself, and I ended up going to Munich. And while I was in Munich, I looked up things to do in Munich, and there was this thing online that I found called the Hitler and the Third Reich Tour. And that surprised me that was a thing in Munich, because I had always thought of Hitler as like a Berlin thing. I never thought of it as a Munich thing. But apparently, Munich was actually the epicenter of the early Nazi movement, and I had no idea about this. So I'm like, okay, I have to do this tour. It sounds really interesting. And they take this tour, and it's amazing. They take you to all the breweries that the Nazis used to give like all their original speeches at, like when they rose to power. And they take you to the department stores that like Kristallnacht happened at. And they just tell you like all these crazy stories about the like late 1930s. Amazing. I had no idea about any of this. This was like one of the coolest walking tours I've ever done. Yeah, because I never realized that. I guess like Himmler, who is the head of the SS, is from Munich, and Goebbels and Hitler both really didn't like Berlin, so they liked posting up in Munich like way more. So like all their offices and stuff were there, and it's just
It was also Nuremberg, I think.
was another one of the like locales.
Yeah, like that's when they made that movie, Triumph of the Will. Is a rally at Nuremberg, I'm pretty sure.
Oh.
But Nuremberg is also Bavaria.
In the epicenter, right? So Munich is in the German state of Bavaria. So like this is something that also like I didn't really put together until I was there, that Germany is younger than the United States. So the United States started in 1776 or whatever, but Germany didn't unify until like the late 1800s.
If you also think about it, they also reunified in 1991. So
Yeah, it's actually much younger. So the individual states of Germany like even have more of a cultural identity than even the U.S. ones do. So
think
like,
about this though. Prussia doesn't exist as a state anymore. It used to be the biggest and most important German state. Now it doesn't exist. Berlin is one state, its own state, and around Berlin is Brandenburg as a state.
you know what's really interesting I learned? So Berlin, the state of Germany, actually loses money. Someone was telling me this.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. You
That
told me.
yeah, that the city of Berlin is a net negative, but the German nation subsidizes it because they find like Berlin is like this epicenter, like cultural epicenter right now, and it's one of the most interesting cities, probably the most interesting city of the last 100 years. I mean, you could make that argument, and it's so the German national like nation state is so fascinated by what's happening in Berlin that they're letting it operate at a loss just as like a cultural experiment of like, this seems to be working. Let's just keep subsidizing Berlin and see what happens. You know?
I think it's so interesting, man. The German government is so smart in this modern age. For instance, I bet you there are so many American cities that operate at a loss, but just because the leadership of it is too incompetent to have it not be that way. But for instance, there's this program that I was participating in when I did my master's degree at the University of Bonn, and it's in English. The education is in English. So you have people from China, people from India, people from the United States all go there to study because you can study for free. And then in exchange, so you pay 300 euros a semester, which is almost nothing. And then in exchange for that, you get a train ticket where you can travel all around the state that you're in for free in any train. So even these regional trains to go to different cities and stuff. And so that's so awesome. It's a great idea, I think, because they don't have any natural resources in Germany, not really. And so they're trying to stimulate this idea economy, and I think it's brilliant. And also, if you study an engineering discipline, after you graduate, you can get 10,000 euros from the German government for really little paperwork to start some company. It's just so awesome. And in Europe, you can live, actually, with 10,000 euros for a while.
Certainly in Berlin. Yeah, Berlin's cheap as hell. That's why it's so interesting right now. That is really smart. It's like Startup Chile, but just for the entire nation state of...
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, so Munich is in this German state called Bavaria, which I also didn't really put together until I was there. So like Bavaria is that thing that has the blue and white flag that you see at every beer hall in the U.S. Because they like,
Yeah, also the BMW logo.
oh, whoa, I never put that together. No way.
Yeah, Bavarian Motorworks.
Wow. Yeah, so it's like so interesting. Like Bavaria is like the Texas of Europe, where they are a state of Germany, but you see probably 10x the number of Bavarian flags than German flags when you're there.
Yeah, because they lost to Prussia for the creation of a German state. That's what Bismarck was doing. He had to crush Bavaria and Austria to make Germany united under Prussia, and that's why the capital of Germany is in Berlin now.
Yeah, so they are not so fond of the German nation. Yeah, because think about it. It's like they nationalized under Germany, and what immediately happened? They started 2 world wars and lost them both.
They're also Catholic, and
Yeah.
and Prussia was Protestant. So they have this weird greeting that they say there, which when you encounter somebody in the street, you can say to them, "Grüß Gott," which is kind of similar to "Assalamu alaikum," but in German, which I think is funny.
Which means just like peace be upon you.
Or
in
I don't know,
Arabic or whatever.
or
That's
it's
what it means in
something. It's
Arabic.
like great God or some kind of crazy shit
Salaam
like
alaikum
that.
means
Yeah.
peace be upon you.
Okay, so then it's not that.
Allahu
It's-
Akbar.
Yeah,
is
that
the-
was more like that.
Yeah,
Which I think is just interesting. Weird way to greet people.
yeah. Yeah, but anyway, Bavaria was so awesome, so interesting. And so, okay, so like Bavaria is known for having the best beer in the world. This is where Oktoberfest is. The beer there is outstanding. It's almost a different kind of beverage than beer as we think about it in the U.S. Like it's literally delicious. It's just amazing. I had the best beer of my life, the Augustiner at the Oktoberfest Museum in Bavaria. Freaking amazing. And it's so interesting, right? Because Munich was bombed at the end of World War II. So all the breweries that survived are in like alleys because they weren't in like the main areas. The main areas all got bombed.
Interesting.
So all the like old iconic breweries are like in alleys somewhere. So there's an Oktoberfest museum in like one of these alleys that has the Augustiner, and it's just freaking amazing. Hofbrauhaus Munich, also amazing. That's where like they have like a flag. Oh, so this was so interesting that I learned on the tour. So swastikas are illegal in Germany, but there's a swastika at the Hofbrauhaus Munich because that was one of the original like Nazi hangouts, and it's where Hitler gave a lot of his speeches. And they tried to get rid of it, but they couldn't because there's like a historical landmark, like this one swastika carved into the wall. So now it's covered with a Bavarian flag. Because like a bunch of like neo-Nazis would go there and like pay pilgrimage to the like one swastika in Germany, and now they had to cover. So there's a swastika at the Hofbrauhaus Munich covered with a Bavarian flag.
Crazy.
Because also the Nazi salute is illegal in Germany. Also, this is so interesting. Like this whole dynamic that they have there, because like these iconic like things from history are just like brew houses. Like you go to these brew houses, and it's like shit. This is where like Kristallnacht happened. You know?
Yeah, but so this was always interesting to me. My friend Nicholas was always, he said this to me once, and I thought it was fascinating. He said this entire Nazism only lasted 12 years, and Germany as a entity, or whatever, even before Germany became like a unified country, is thousands of years old. But people have focused so much on only these 12 years. For instance, we did this experiment. If you type Germany into Audible, the first like 5 pages of results are all about Nazis in World War II. But it's so interesting because it's such a short time in the whole course of this. Brothers Grimm and Mozart and Beethoven and, like so much stuff that's not just this one thing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Yeah. And like their soccer team winning the World Cup and all this like cool stuff that's happened there. It was also interesting just like talking to the tour guides, just like their perspectives on how like you confront this like history in the country. And it's like I think that their solutions to be like really open about it, like everyone just like talks about it all the time. And then therefore like it's not that big of a deal. Like it's no one's like hiding anything or whatever.
They kind of treat it as a foreign occupation in history accounts. That's what it seems like to me. They'll be talking about as if some foreign army had come and invaded and set up some puppet government or something like that.
I also like this idea that in Germany, there's a culture around just like going to beer halls and drinking a couple of Augustiners and then talking with your friends about politics in the world. And we don't really do this in the US. You don't really just like go out, like get beers intentionally to talk about like politics or economics or anything like that. Like, I don't think I've ever intentionally set up an intellectual conversation with anyone in like the last 5 years. Like, on Friday we should talk about the economy of your, I don't do this kind of stuff, but they just like do it like culturally there, Super interesting. All right, yeah. So Bavaria was a super interesting place, and we met up after that in Budapest. What do you think of Budapest?
It was, for me, fascinating because I have always been interested in Austria-Hungary because it's just such a weird thing to me. So, I spent that time in Prague in 2008, and ever since then I've been interested in Austria-Hungary because people were telling me all of these kind of historical reference points, such as the Habsburgs and all. And as a teenager growing up in America, I had never even heard this word once. And there was this double-headed eagle everywhere. I was just thinking, what the hell is this? So I just started looking into it and getting really interested in it. And then also, so I was just fascinated by this idea because some of my ancestors immigrated to the United States from Eastern Europe, this area, and I just, whatever, has been fascinated in this, and like the kind of like Jewish culture in this as well, like shtetls and so on, and pogroms, and why they had these area like in the Russian Empire, this Pale of Settlement, where they forced all Jews to settle, and I don't know, I'm just fascinated because also Austria-Hungary, like, so I don't know, it's just, if you look, for instance, at a map of Europe prior to World War One, it's just so interesting to see huge Turkey, Ottoman Empire, huge Austria-Hungary, huge Russia, and German Empire. And that's it. There's no small little states that they have today. Czech Republic and Slovenia and Slovakia and all of these weird... It's like somebody punched a window and it just like fractured into all of these things. So that's just fascinating. And then just even to think about... I was just riffing on in my mind about nation states and nationalism and all this kind of stuff while I was there. And one thing that I was thinking a lot about in Prague was... I saw this monument to Franz Kafka, and Kafka is like the favorite son of Prague. And I think that this is interesting because this monument said, blah, 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 Kafka, writer of Metamorphosis, and blah, blah, blah. And he was a Czech-born, German-speaking Jew. And it was like, that's such a hyphenated identity. Similar to the kind of hyphenated identities that everybody has in America. And so now, though, we have this construction of the Czech Republic. And people that are born in the Czech Republic are Czech people. And they speak Czech. And they, you know what I mean? And it's just so hyper-nationalized, which I think is kind of backwards and dumb. And then when we went to Bratislava, I was like so just astounded that they can't even be in the same country as the Czech Republic. No, we're too different. We need our own hyper-nationalistic, like, weird little country where Bratislava is the capital of it. I was astounded that Bratislava is the capital of a nation-state. Like, it seems like a weird, shitty village to me. And so, that was so weird. I was like, these guys, like, disassociated themselves from the Czech Republic because they don't want to be, like, affiliated with Prague because they're too different. Like, that's so crazy to me. And I also just kept thinking about this line that MIA once said, I spit shit because I'm Libya and split a check like Slovakia. And I thought that was an awesome line. It has nothing to do with anything.
I don't know how to shout that last part, but the stuff you were saying before was kind of interesting. Budapest was cool. I think it has this vibe where they call it like the Amsterdam of Eastern Europe or something. It has a vibe like a very, very tourist city, but it would be an interesting place to spend some time, I think. It also, I don't know, like, really good club scene, really interesting things, really interesting people, but, you know, it seems like a tough place to live.
Yeah, it's good for a holiday, but I wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah, there's a lot of people trying to rip you off, but I don't know, maybe once you know the game, it's kind of an interesting place to be. It was a really cool city to visit.
Yeah.
Bratislava I also thought was interesting. So we met some people at DEF CON that lived in Bratislava, and they took us to this hackerspace called Progress Bar.
Oh, yeah, I didn't go there, so maybe that's, like, I don't have such a good perspective. But also, Budapest seems so Eastern. It seems like Istanbul. It seems not...
Doesn't it? But like everyone speaks English, you know. Like
but
my
it just seems so
perception.
different.
I've never been to Istanbul, but my perception there is like people don't speak English.
I don't know. I've only spent a very few hours in Istanbul just a 5-hour airport layover.
Like Istanbul to me seems like a different place. Like honestly, like pieces of Budapest look like pieces of Brooklyn. You know, like they're not so different. They're just like, oh, here's the trendy brunch place with rope lighting, you know, or whatever, right? There's actually a place called The Brooklyn.
Yeah,
Brooklyn
that's true. I don't know though, man. I just felt it was different walking around in the streets though, and
yeah, maybe there is. Yeah, there is a bit of an Eastern vibe to it. There's things Europe's better at than the U.S. and there's things that U.S. is better at than Europe, and like it definitely encapsulates the European thing. Like there's underground things that like you just don't have like 5-story underground bars places the way that you do in like Budapest or Prague or whatever in the U.S. But I don't know, like when you just like factor that out, it kind of seems people speak English, you know. Same with Bratislava. This was also so interesting. Like in Bratislava, people spoke better English than anywhere else we were in Eastern Europe. And I think that it's because it's such a weird city that like you almost have to speak good English.
What? That cop didn't speak any English at all.
Okay, yeah. But
they spoke German though. That was interesting.
Oh yeah, because that's like the English of that area, maybe.
Kind of, right?
That probably is, dude. German's probably the abstraction of a lot of these satellite cities. Like the way that if you're from Canada and like you say you're from Montreal, you're from the U.S., you're from Mexico, everyone communicate in English. But it's like probably like Bratislava, like I don't know,
Slovenia, Romania.
Yeah. It's like you just like or Turkey even. Like you would just use German as the like interface or whatever.
I think it's still English, but maybe German is the second.
But this is one I also thought was interesting. So like okay, so I went to this hackerspace called Progress Bar in Bratislava. That was super interesting because like you realize that people that talk about like things like cryptocurrencies and people that talk about like cyberpunk ethos in Eastern Europe talk about it in a much more serious way than we talk about in the U.S. In the U.S., it's like kind of like a fun little hat that you put on. It's like, look at how cool I am. I make a Bitcoin transaction. Like we should put stuff on the blockchain. Yo, let's go to this awesome party in New York City. You know, like life is so awesome in Manhattan that like you're not trying to disrupt anything. You're just trying to like experience it. But then you go to like place like Bratislava where they're like, yeah, our government is literally psychotic and corrupt and they steal everyone's money. So we need to subvert them. And the only way that there's ever going to be progress in this entire city is if we do it ourselves. And it's just like, whoa. I was just, you know, like think this stuff's cool, but you guys are serious about it, you know? And that is so interesting to me, that ethos that they have in Europe or in parts of Europe where like even Berlin, this is why Berlin is the epicenter of this stuff. Is like they've seen so much shit over the last, 20 years or whatever that they're just like, all right, we're rebuilding this stuff from scratch. We don't trust institutions of the 20th century at all. We're in the U.S., like you get this vibe, like, yeah, whatever, like Lehman Brothers crashed the economy, but like you don't really encapsulate it the way they do in Europe, I feel.
Yeah, totally. I feel that Europeans are way more aggro with all this stuff and true believer of all this stuff. For instance, when Google tried to, I kind of like this. So I don't like it in some respect, but I like it also because when Google tried to make their headquarters in Kreuzberg or whatever, then Antifa just went apeshit and prevented them from doing it.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. Like I could never, it's inconceivable to me that, okay, perfect example. Amazon wants to move to New York. There's no way that American leftist punks are going to prevent them from doing it. I would eat my shoe if they prevent that. But in Germany, it's like, yeah, Google wants to move to Kreuzberg. No fucking way. And they do it. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, Google tried to make an office in Berlin and it got like stopped by like people crashing their windows or whatever. It really is incredible. Yeah, but it's so funny because like we have DEF CON in the US, which is the hacker conference that happens in Las Vegas every year. I've been to the last two. They're awesome. They're super interesting. But there's an element to them that's almost like you're play acting hacker stuff. It's here's a cool hacker idea or whatever. But apparently there's this thing called like the CCC. It's like the Chaos Computer Club.
Oh yeah.
And it's in Germany every year, but it's like the European. In Hamburg. It's in the European DEF CON, and it's supposed to be like just on order of magnitude more legit than the one.
It's super insane. I've been to their club in Berlin. They have this. That guy, Iggy, took me there.
Oh yeah, the Android dev for the Ethereum Foundation. Yeah.
And it was so awesome. They have wall of Club Mate. It's all done up as a spaceship, and they have this weird stuff. You have to put your hand and scan your hand, and then like this crazy door opens. Then you walk in. And people are there just hacking on stuff. There's weird robots everywhere. The lights, it's all like a goddamn crazy spaceship with lights and just cyberpunk metal all over the walls where it looks like the Nebuchadnezzar from The Matrix. It's so
Well, there was
dope.
something called the Crypto Anarchist Institute in Prague that we didn't go to. But
I would have liked to.
It's so interesting that Europe has this scene to it. And I think that like the club system like plays into it somehow. That's like why other clubs are better. It's
Yeah.
like
For instance, consider this. There's no VIP in European clubs. In American clubs, there's always a VIP zone.
yeah, and those fucking clubs in Berlin that like force everyone to wear black because they don't even want to like express any materialism whatsoever or whatever.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah, that was interesting. And then we ended up from Bratislava went to Vienna, which is another super interesting city. God, man.
Oh yeah, Vienna is really cool.
Yeah, man,
Beautiful.
put that one on the list. That place is so interesting.
Yeah.
Freaking awesome churches from like the 12th century and like dope buildings and palaces everywhere. Jesus, man,
Yeah.
palaces. This is my takeaway from Eastern Europe. So we went to this palace in Budapest, was it? Yeah. And it was just like a palace. Like, like all these communist governments of Eastern Europe like didn't spend money on like social services or infrastructure. They just built palaces
Which
everywhere.
one? The Bath?
Any of them. Like, there's like you just have palaces all over Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
like
but that wasn't the communist governments. I feel like that was those monarchies. And it's so awesome. So one of our friends, when we were there, he said, "Isn't it amazing what you can do when you don't have to pay for public schools?"
yeah, whatever. But then, like, now that they don't have emperors anymore, they just like repurpose them all into like restaurants. But
Yeah,
they're
it's so
obviously
dope.
not expensive restaurants because they don't.
Oh yeah, the place we went in Budapest. Oh my God, it was so good. New York Cafe. If you're ever in Budapest, definitely go there. It's astounding.
But you can just go have like a cheeseburger and a Diet Coke in a palace. Like you could not do
incredible.
this in the United States. If you had a palace, repurposed restaurant, it'd be expensive and it'd be
Yeah.
like trendy and Michelin starred and whatever.
Yeah.
Here you can just like walk into a palace, like you're with your dollar purchasing power, and be like, "Give me a cheeseburger and fries in this palace." Fuck yeah!
Yeah, it's so awesome. And you can get a table. You don't have to wait. We drove there with no reservation. They gave us a table. Amazing.
God, what an interesting place. All right, cool. So anyway, that's kind of what we've been up to. But this is a book club podcast,
Oh,
so
yeah,
we
sorry.
probably should talk about books. All right, cool. So we're going to talk about The Laws of Human Nature, which is a book by Robert Greene that came out a month ago, maybe.
It came out right before we left, in the end of October.
Yes, let's call it a month ago. Okay. How do I even describe this book? Okay, so Robert Greene, I don't know, like his bio probably better than me, but
all right. This book, in my opinion, fits into the canon of Robert Greene's literature in this way where Robert Greene started out, okay, I was an awkward teenager trying to, I feel like as most young man teenagers are, young boy teenagers, are trying to figure out how to talk to girls, how to be social and all this. So I read this book, The Pickup Artist, and I got by Neil Strauss, I believe.
it's called The Game, right?
Oh yeah, the game, yeah.
I never read it, but I just know that.
Okay. So yeah, I read that book and I thought it was interesting. It's just some kind of corny tactics on how to initiate conversations with girls and get them to go on dates with you. But then in this school of literature, Robert Greene also wrote a book that came out around the same time, which was called, which was called The Art of Seduction. And it's super manipulative and weird. I recently re-listened to part of it, and I just remember thinking, wow, what a weird dude. But but I was into it at the time. At the time, I thought it was cool. And then he wrote this book, 48 Laws of Power, which I also re-listened to recently, which is also super crazy and manipulative and weird. But at the time, I thought it was interesting. So one of the things in it, he was talking about Thomas Edison and how he stole Nikola Tesla's inventions. And he was like, did this analysis of it, and then he's like, understand, you should probably try to be like Thomas Edison and just go around stealing other people's inventions and taking credit for their work. That's the way that you can get the most power. And they also have the most insane narrator for the Audible audiobook of it who talks like this the whole time. It's like they sourced the movie trailer guy. And it was totally insane. But then he wrote this book, 33 Strategies of War, which is a little bit more interesting. It's just about famous generals and battles, and Napoleon and stuff like this, and Genghis Khan. That one was cool. And I was more into it. So as he writes these, I'm progressively getting older and getting smarter. And they stay relevant to me throughout my life, which is so interesting. And then when I was at 25, I think, he wrote one called Mastery, which was at that point the pinnacle of his mental development or thought, where he was saying that actually the way to be able to have agency over the things that happen to you in your life and the things that you do is by just becoming a master of some skill. And I decided then, okay, I'm going to become a master programmer. And then this book, The Laws of Human Nature, came out, and it's about how to cooperate with people in a good way. And I listened to it 3 times in a row. I think it's really interesting. I really like a lot of the ideas from it. And so, yeah, for me, it's just the final, I guess maybe this guy has one more book in him. I read it, or rather I listened to that he had a stroke recently. And so maybe this guy's got one more book in him, and maybe that one will also be mind-blowing when it comes out. But it's just really interesting to see how his development as an author and my development as a person have mapped, and his writings have remained relevant in my life like that.
Cool, that's awesome. I knew of Robert Greene because I read this book called The 50th Law, which is, I guess, okay, so he wrote this book, The 48 Laws of Power. But then I guess that he encountered 50 Cent as some sort of friend and like intellectual foil. And he decided to make an addendum. I'm going to go with addendum to the 48 Laws of Power, where he wanted to incorporate 50 Cent's story into that book. And he wrote a book called The 50th Law, which I read, and I thought was awesome. But I thought it was so interesting, because that book, the entire thing, is that he interpolates like stories of 50 Cent's life with these like long interpretations, which are like his ideas from the 48 Laws of Power. And I just remember thinking that the story of 50 Cent's life is so much more interesting than anything he was saying. And like it was this weird like cyborg of a book that I was just like, I just want to learn more about 50 Cent. Because like his story is one of the most epic things in the world. I'll give you like the TLDR, which is like he was peddling drugs on the streets of wherever, New York maybe, I don't know, whatever, one of these cities. Mm-hmm. And he is also rapping about like what it's like to peddle drugs on the streets of wherever. And he eventually gets a record deal to write his record about, his experiences. Writes a record, and the day before it's about to get released, he gets a drive-by. Like, he's in a car, and, like, 2 guys from a rival gang come up and shoot him. They shoot, like, 20 bullets in the car, and they hit him 9 times. And he almost dies, and miraculously somehow doesn't die. And the record label is like, okay, we can't associate with someone that's like this deep into gang stuff. So like they just drop him. Even though he recorded this awesome album, they just won't publish it anymore. And he's in the hospital, like within an inch of his life. And he just got his record deal cut. And like it should be that he's at his lowest point and like everything went terrible. But he's like, no, like I'm going to make this awesome. Like I'm going to release this record regardless of the fact that my record label like dropped me. And he gives his records to all of his drug dealing connections, and they like give it out like with like cocaine like on the streets. It's like, yo, here's the record too. And it like becomes this thing where he uses his network of drug dealers to distribute his record, but he's also like in recovery for like 6 months. So it's not like he's out promoting his record. It's like he's invisible. So there's just this record from this guy that nobody ever sees the face of that's awesome. And it becomes like one of the biggest like underground hits. And he just recovers from this. And like parlays this into fame by like calling out all these like pop rappers at the time, like Ja Rule, that are just like, hey, I'm from the streets, and he's just like, none of the things you're saying are actually what happens. So I know you're a fraud, and I'm just gonna come at you like really hard. And he just like has this crazy career trajectory, then like becomes like a famous, successful, cultural figure, and it's really an incredible story. But Robert Greene like co-wrote a book with him, and I read it, and I was like, okay, that's a pretty interesting book. But that, I thought, was the end of it. But then you suggested that we read this book that just came out, The Laws of Human Nature. And I actually thought this book was awesome. I was worried it would be a little self-helpy. So, like, we read Sapiens, that whole trilogy. So, like, that was kind of the thought leadery, like, hey, here's some, like, abstract ideas about human interaction, like, in human history, whatever. Like, cool, got that. Like, there's kind of, like, that's been elbowed out the space for that. So you got to do something like kind of unique. And Robert Greene's style, when he approached this book, is super interesting, right? Because I was joking to you that he just reads Wikipedia articles and talks about them.
Yeah.
Which is like not so wrong for what he does. So like each chapter of this book is basically he'll read a Wikipedia article and he'll be like, here's the story of, Anton Chekhov. Mm-hmm. And he'll like tell you his history. And it's like cool. Like everyone he picks, like there's like Howard Hughes and Coco Chanel and like Richard Nixon, Mary Shelley, Michael Eisner, Martin Luther King. Like all the Wikipedia articles he picks are super interesting.
Yeah.
But then he'll just like do this summary of it, and then he'll just be like, interpretation.
Yeah. And then there's another part where he goes, understand.
But he's like, interpretation. And then he'll like interpret the story. And like some of them are kind of stretches where you're like, I don't know. But some of them are like, fuck, dude.
Yeah.
Like, he's, like, killing it right now.
Totally.
Yeah.
But then the part where he goes,
Yeah.
understand, and then he like just tells you the moral in case you were too dumb to get it from the first part.
So, like, the first half of this book is about, like, I would call it, like, P2P interaction, like, person to person. So, I guess, like, it's, like, core thesis is that everyone's a narcissist, and then, like, everyone thinks more about themselves than they think about other people. So, your job as someone that wants to impact the world is to figure out to what riff on narcissism the person that you're dealing with has, and then how to use that to your advantage to achieve your goals.
And then also to check your own narcissistic tendencies and tendencies towards grandiosity. So it's really interesting, right? Because a lot of the advice in the book is also self-contradictory. If you follow one chapter, he'll say, people are too, timid, and they don't do what they want. They don't follow their intuition. That's really bad. People should follow their intuition more. Something like that. I'm just paraphrasing it. And so another part of it will say, people follow too much their intuition, and blah, blah, blah. You should rein in your intuition. But I think both of them are equally valid, and it's just that you have to know when to deploy each one and consider them in relation to each other.
Yeah, totally. But here's something interesting, right? So I have had this idea that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is like that there's no such thing as ignoring politics. There's only being bad at politics.
Right, totally.
So it's like in your workplace or in your friend group or whatever. Like you can be like, I'm just doing X and I don't care about the politics of it.
But even that is a political
yeah,
strategy.
That doesn't mean you don't care about the politics. It just means you're playing politics at zero. So like, what if you just played it at a higher level? Like, how does that work in your interactions at work, in your interactions with like your friend groups or whatever? So I got a lot out of this book in terms of thinking about how to deal with, because he'll accurately describe, I think, a lot of personality types. Like it's so good. Like he just, like maybe the first 5 or so chapters are just looking at different personality types and then like anecdotes about how you might be able to use them to your advantage. For example, I like this one. I mean, they're all really good. I'm just thinking like off the top of my head. One of them was about people that like to bullshit a lot. And he's like, I always get confrontational with people that like to bullshit a lot. But he was like, this is not the right strategy. Your strategy should be to like let them talk more. Like actually like suss it out. Like you're like some sort of detective or something. And you let them talk and then you like be like, oh, that's really interesting. What about this? Oh, what did you think about this? Oh, that's so cool. Like tell me more about this. And it's like the more you're almost like a police like guy trying to like get solve a crime case where you get more and more information at the table, and then you just like push back really quickly on like the weakest point that you've identified. So it's like you're a fencer and you just like quickly stab it.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, but surely that can't be right because of this. And then you like observe their split second reaction to that comment, and that is like where all the information is. Wait, let me finish this one thought because I just remembered that. Wait, what?
No, go.
Oh, so he's saying this is such an interesting idea. That in person-to-person interaction, there's something that's almost there like ultraviolet light, where it's people's body language and what they're actually trying to say to you. But it's like, it's invisible in the normal interaction. It's like UV light. But like
vibes is what people call it. That's what I think. What people mean when they say vibes. Anyway.
Oh, yeah, like someone's energy or something. Yeah, for sure. But like that idea of just, okay, let me actually have an interaction with someone. And let me put on these glasses where I'm actually trying to look at that UV light. And then, something like, okay, I believe this dude is a bullshitter. Let him talk himself in a spiral. Let me find a weak point of his things that he said, and let me jab it real quick.
Yeah.
And then let me see how he reacts. And like, I'm just looking at his split-second reaction, because no matter how good a bullshitter you are, that split second of someone calling you out, you're going to scramble and then like have to quickly react.
Yeah.
But if you're like actually being real, you won't scramble. You'll like think about it and like try to figure out how to like deal with it, But he's like, you can suss these things out by just being perceptive to that thing that people have of just like their subtle, giveaways.
Micro expressions, he called them.
Yeah,
that was interesting.
He was saying like he used this analogy. I forget the context of it, but it was interesting. He's like, it was some anecdote he was telling about some guy talking to some girl, and she's like smiling and like talking to him, but she's gripping her parasol very tightly.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And it's like the thing that actually matters is that she's gripping the parasol tightly, because that's her true expression of like being hostile in this engagement versus her like
her words.
Her words are like friendly. But it's like you can just be perceptive of that. And then he suggests that you go to a cafe And I thought this was an awesome suggestion to just go to a cafe and just observe people. Like, look at a conversation that you're not part of, and then try to say, like, who is the higher status in this conversation? What jobs do these people probably have? What's their relationship? And like just try to suss out, like just start like A/B testing your ideas and like your ability to do this. I thought it was so interesting. I'm like, I need to definitely do this. Also riffing on that idea, I was going to tell you this too, because I think I had mentioned this to you, that I recently had a technical interview that I thought was interesting because he used the CTO of this company that I was interviewing at, used one of these tropes that this guy was saying about how you suss out bullshit, which is you let someone talk themselves in a spiral and then you jab on the pressure point and see their reaction. So he asked me to describe like a software system that I'd architected before. And I described in detail a software system I'd architected before. And he was just doing this whole thing of like, yeah, okay, cool, awesome. That's a good way to do that. Tell me more about this. Tell me more about that. And being like super friendly and like passive the entire time. Till like I'd spent like 10 or 15 minutes describing the whole system. And then like really quickly, it's like a snap of a finger, change expression. Sure, but what if there were multiple concurrent users using this system and like how would that react? And then just like smiles again, you know? But it's like that is I was so, because I had read this Robert Greene book, so I'm like, oh, he's doing that trope. Like I totally know what he's doing. He's doing the stab to see how I like compose myself and react. But I'd actually built the system, so like I felt completely confident with it. But I was like, that's actually a dope way to suss out someone, right? Because like you could always say this, right? Like if you read someone's resume, they could be like, oh, I was a designer on the Nike redesign project. Sounds awesome. But what did you actually do? You know, like if you're trying to like figure out like how much bullshit there is in someone's, you know, resume, this is a great way to do it. Let them talk, like let them describe, push, and then like see their reaction to it. That was awesome. Yeah.
He was saying that some police officer in a cartoon would always do
Columbo.
Yeah.
He was a detective in some TV show or whatever.
Yeah.
Man, I love that. I agree with that. That's a great way to deal with people like that, is to let them talk themselves in a spiral and push back. He also was talking about people that are aggressive. I thought that this was really cool in this first half of the book, when he's saying that people that are natural, like bullies and aggressive, they're always going to want to control a situation. They're always going to be aggressive, but your strategy should be to just let them know that you're going to be a lot of trouble. Like, not that you could like beat them or whatever, but just that you will make them work a lot harder than they could to bully someone else, which I thought was cool. So if you have like someone in a workplace that like threatening to sue you or whatever, you just like threaten to sue them back. It's like, all right, yeah, but this, yeah, sure, maybe you're going to win, but it's going to be like a lot of work for you. And like, then they're like, this is more trouble than it's like worth to deal with.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's really good insight into all these different kind of personalities that you might encounter and just like strategies to think about how you interact with them, I thought.
Yeah, totally.
All right. So also about this book that I thought was awesome. So as he gets to the second half of the book, he gets away from this idea of like dealing with person-to-person interaction, and his anecdotes, he starts like making broader and broader claims. Really like gets into that like sapiens territory. Like, I'm going full thought leader, here. So two of them I thought were outstanding. So one of the anecdotes was about this dude named Gao Yuan, who I'd never heard of before, but he was some dude in China in the 1960s during the Cultural Revolution. Oh, yeah. He wrote a book. I think that's why.
We should read it.
I totally want to read this. The Cultural Revolution in China is amazing. I need to read way more about it. But he drew this conclusion that like a lot of millennial culture is like the Cultural Revolution, which I thought was a really, really great analogy. The Cultural Revolution is so interesting because he made this analogy that I thought was phenomenal. So, you know, like if you've ever taken a literature class in the US in college or something like that, you like have some literature teacher that's like, okay, this is what the author said, but here's what the author meant. Like there's some hidden interpretation to this novel that they wrote. But the idea of the Cultural Revolution was they convinced students that there's hidden layers to their teachers, like words, the way that their teachers tell them there's hidden layers to some author's words. So they would be like, oh, when the teacher's saying, oh, I'm not a supporter of imperialist America, they're like, yeah, but your words, there's a hidden meaning to them where it is. Oh, I thought that was such a phenomenal idea. But it's also just like this like riff on how mob rule percolates through society and just how that applies to modern times. I thought it was phenomenal. I don't know. I really want to read that book.
Yeah, totally. The Cultural Revolution is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's an actual case study of mob rule. I mean, in the 60s, right? Like, it's not even like Russia, where it was like I don't know. It's like very like people. I don't know. Were people getting like slaughtered the way they were in Russia? Like it's kind of more just.
Yeah, totally. Well, I said this on another one of our podcasts, but I thought it was very interesting that Mao knew or could sense, or the whole world at this time of the 1960s was going through, and it relates again to that hippie movement that you were talking about. In the 1960s, that people were having sort of revolutions all over the world, in the United States, and yeah, just all over. The United States had hippies, and in China, they got in front of this and created a kind of social movement, social upheaval that they controlled and orchestrated, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I think he said this book that he read by this guy Gao Yan is called Born Red, but I totally want to read it. The other chapter that I thought was fascinating in this second half of the book was about the French Revolution. So he talked about this dude Danton, who I actually didn't even know of before, but he created the Committee for Public Safety or whatever that like was orchestrated, like one of the key tenets of the French Revolution, and then he eventually gets guillotined by Robespierre during the Reign of Terror, and then Robespierre eventually gets guillotined. Oh my God, French Revolution is also so interesting.
So awesome.
But he drew this interpretation. So when he goes to the interpretation part, he draws this interpretation to generational warfare or just generational conflict that I thought was amazing. I had not heard this analogy before, but I thought it was really good. So his idea was that the thing of the French Revolution was a generational conflict of people just not caring about the institutions that their ancestors cared about. So every one of the what's called the ancestor, like people that were older in France, were like, oh, the monarch is the divine king, he's the divine ruler of God or whatever. And then anyone that's younger is like, no, American democracy is cool, we don't really buy in this monarchy thing. So it was really this decay of, shared trust and institution, like of a generational gap that led to the French Revolution. I mean, I'm sure there's way more stuff that went into it, but this is the interpretation he drew from it. And then he was talking about how that similar thing happens in the United States now, which I 100% agree with, right? Like it's like my parents, for example, or someone might say like, oh, like this is on CNN, it's so interesting. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care what CNN says. Like I'd rather, I don't think of that as like a thing that matters.
Yeah.
But it's like they would never understand that because to them, like the news on cable TV is something that matters.
Yeah.
But to me, it's just like something that's so irrelevant.
Yeah,
and
it's
doesn't
so
matter.
dumb. My parents are also really into it. It's the stupidest thing.
Yeah, but it's like one of those things. It's a generational like decay of caring about a certain institution, and drawing that analogy to the French Revolution, I loved. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, but then I really also was digging and riffing on the idea that he was saying that the zeitgeist is defined by the 4 generations that are alive at any one time, and that they repeat, which I thought was so fascinating. And so, like in our modern times, we have so my grandparents, they're the generation that fought in World War II, and they were born during the Depression, so they have these ideas about not spending money on frivolous bullshit and about patriotism and all kinds of stuff like this. And then you have my parents' generation who are baby boomers, and they grew up and came to maturity during the Vietnam War. And then you have Generation X who watched Fast Times at Ridgemont High and I don't know, listened to Nirvana and stuff. And then you have millennials. And the society that we live in, it is defined by the interplay of all those generations. And then I got really interested by these 2 dudes that I know at work. One of whom is a Gen Xer who goes to parties and hangs out with millennials and younger people. And then the other one is a guy who's maybe 5 years younger than me. So I'm 29. And so he's just graduated college. But he also hangs out with people who are older than he and we went to a concert of the Pixies. He had never heard of the Pixies before. And I think the Pixies are even a little bit Gen X-ish, not even millennials. But he was just game for going. And Robert Greene talked about how this is one thing you can do to make your ideas still relevant and to keep your head in the game, is to associate with older generations. So if you go and talk with your grandmother or talk with old people, you can incorporate some of their ideas just about life and what they think about stuff. You can talk to people who are really young, who are still in high school or whatever, and get some perspective from them on what's cool and just how they view the world. And try and incorporate these ideas into your own thinking without judgment. And I thought it was so fascinating. hits on this point a lot that life is hard and the world is, full of disappointment and people are competitive. So people, as they grow up, have the tendency to close themselves off to others and just to focus inwardly on their own situation, their own personal shit. But rather than, if you can force yourself to refocus outward, as you did when you were a child and you were looking to other people to see what they were doing and stuff, I mean, in some respects, I think it's good that if you can, be interested in, when you're talking to somebody, what they're trying to express and trying to just, rather than turn inward, turn outward a bit, that is really interesting.
I like that idea, riffing on that he was saying that a lot of ideas, when you feel, okay, so each generation in this cycle, he said this is like first formulated by this Arab dude named Ibn Khaldun. I don't know like how much truth there's that, but
I want to look it up too.
But there's like each of these 4 generations that coexist at any time have a certain characteristic that represents them. So one is about decay and like chaos and uneasiness. One is about revolution. There's like some generation that's legitimately revolutionary. And then the one after that is about like finding order and stability after the revolution. And then one is about questioning the order and stability that has been, there. And then like one is about the, starting up the next revolution. So his thing on this is that millennials are starting up the next revolution, but it's really going to be Gen Z that actually has it.
Yeah.
And like millennials are like really the questioning and like figuring out, and like things are slightly uneasy. And I thought this was interesting where he's like, when things don't really make sense, like when you disagree with your generation or you disagree with the way things feel, maybe you're just ahead. Like maybe it's the next generation that actually is in solidarity with you. Maybe you need to just wait or like coexist with the generation after you. So I thought that was an interesting idea that you can just, like if you feel differently than your peers, maybe you would feel more in tune with people that are younger than you. Maybe like you're ahead of the curve kind of where the trend is. I feel that to some extent. Like I feel like when I talk to Gen Z people, I'm in more solidarity with them than most millennials, because, I don't know. I think it's just like this thing about being a software developer and living in the online world the way like almost everyone in Gen Z does. You feel it more than millennials, where you have this, I'm friends with people all over the world that I don't really even necessarily know that well. It's just that's the lifestyle I live, but that's the way everyone in Gen Z lives, kind of thing.
Also, the idea that the very important events that happen when you're a child or an early teenager shape your generation. So that our generation is shaped by September 11th and the financial crisis to a really large extent. And then what does that say about our generational character? Oh, God damn it. This is also so interesting. So I was really digging the thing that you're defined by your generation. So if you, Jordan, were born in the 1920s, you would have been a completely different person than if you were born in the 1960s. Then if you were born in the 1980s, and he's just talking about how you can say that that's not, but it's totally true. And I just think it's so fascinating, like, to try and think about casting myself to a different generation or mapping my ideas, and it's so impossible, but just to realize or think about how those things affect me. All right, I love Robert Greene because he's into all the same stuff that I am. He's into Wagner, and he's into Carl Jung, and he's into Nietzsche, and he's into Schopenhauer. I love all that stuff. And so, he just rocks. Like, he'll just hit you with some dope meme right in the middle of the book. Like, just riffing on the need to follow your intuition. And he talks about the prelude to the Wagner opera Das Rheingold, and how he just didn't focus on it for a while, and finally it hit him, and he just came up with a perfect thing. And then I listened to it, and I was like, oh my God, he's completely right. This is such badass, amazing music.
I remember that anecdote. It was in Mastery that he talks about this, how Wagner, he was talking in this book, Mastery, which, I don't know, we'll get to it in a sec, but I'll talk about it a little bit now, but he's talking about how it is almost this psychological idea, right? So in The Laws of Human Nature, he talks about Jung a lot, and this idea that, like, your attitude is actually quantifiable. So people think of, like, your attitude or whatever as this, like, super abstract thing. But he's like, no, it's not. It's like you're, like, almost predispositioned to doing certain things.
I tweeted the thing. I thought it was so cool that I recorded and tweeted it. Want me to read it?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hold on. I just have to find it.
Okay, but while you're looking for that, I'll tell you the way I thought about it. But it's so interesting. Like, when someone says, "Oh, you have a bad attitude," it's this like kind of vague notion. You don't really know what they mean. But he was saying that like Jung had this idea that your attitude is like almost predetermined responses to certain stimuli. So like you're pre-compiling. Go ahead and say the.
Okay, what he says is exactly the quote was, "To have an attitude means to be ready for something definite, even though this something is unconscious. For having an attitude is synonymous with an a priori orientation to a definite thing, no matter whether this be represented in consciousness or not."
Yeah, that idea is so powerful to me. It's like, okay, so if I have an attitude, it means that when some stimulus hits me, I will respond in some very specific way. So it's like, okay, maybe I have a really good attitude because of all this unconscious stuff. So somebody at a bar spills a drink on me, and I like laugh about it because it's like life is awesome and we live in an amazing world and like like I don't care.
Yeah.
But maybe I have a bad attitude, and it's like this unconscious thing of someone spilling a drink on me like causes me to spiral into like a bad thing. It's like your attitude is actually a quantifiable thing. Yeah. That I thought was so cool. But then he's talking about, okay, so this idea that when you're trying to master any kind of field, it's all up, like you're always going to get ideas from external stimuli or like some thing that's maybe not necessarily relate, because like the world is too complicated to just know it all, right? Like you need just like external things to like send you down paths to think about. So it's all about like preparing your mind for some external stimuli to like click it, right? And he was talking about like Wagner and how he had just gotten so good at, all kinds of musical ideas and musical riffs and what their interpretations were, that even though he couldn't complete this opera or couldn't figure out the leitmotif, the core leitmotif that should run through it, he had done so much work that like he went to sleep one day and like he saw it in a dream. And like because he remembered this idea from the dream, he was able to like completely follow that train down to like exactly what the leitmotif should be at the beginning of this opera. And I thought that was a really, yeah, it's so accurate. It's like, okay, I mean, I'm going to go, so like The Laws of Human Nature was a great book. I thought it was awesome. Mastery, I thought was less awesome, but because I'm older, right? This is a book that I should have read when I was 20. And I think that anyone that's listening to this that's early in their career should read it, because it's a lot of things that I think I've come to the conclusion myself, so I didn't really need someone to like lay it out for me. But he is right. It's like he's talking about how to architect your time to put yourself in the optimal position to succeed almost. Yeah, and the ideas in that book were really interesting.
So also another thing about the Wagner stuff, which I thought was interesting, was, all right, so two things. One, touching on Jung, was that he was saying that Wagner, for instance, Wagner was an anti-Semite, and he was saying that he didn't like Jews because they were ruining European music because they were too sentimental, too technical, and too, I don't know, something else. But he was like, but actually, if you listen to, too nostalgic, too sentimental, and too technical. But if you listen to Wagner's music, it's totally nostalgic, sentimental, and technical. And so it's just this idea of the shadow and integrating the shadow, and that you tend to dislike things that are things about yourself that you dislike. I've felt this for so long. And he was getting into this Freudian thing called active denial, that it's so obvious. Like Elliot Spitzer. Elliot Spitzer's like, yeah, be moral, like don't sleep with prostitutes. And then it's, whoa, Elliot Spitzer is sleeping with a prostitute. And then it's like, it's so fucking interesting. It happens all the goddamn time. And one example that I think of a lot is Brazil, right? Brazil is like the most dangerous country in the world. The dude who's running for president got stabbed. So it says
he is the president.
I know, it's crazy. So it says on the Brazil flag, order and progress. So it's like, okay, is Brazil actually an orderly and progressive country? Of course it's not. And so like, but they wouldn't have to write it on their flag if it was actually an orderly and progressive country, So I think that's hilarious. And yeah. But then the other thing about Wagner. Wagner used to wear women's clothes. This is like one of the things that's just known about Wagner. He used to wear women's clothes around.
J. Edgar Hoover or some weirdo.
And so he kept... All right, Robert Greene. All right, usually when I hear these things about gender as a social construct, I just yada, yada, yada over it. And I just think it's whatever, like modernistic trash. And I just don't like to listen to it or engage with it. But goddamn, Robert Greene was talking about how people have to integrate their animus or anima with this.
Oh yeah, this is an idea from Jung that the animus is the masculine entity of the female, and the anima is the feminine entity of the male. Yeah, and this idea is really cool too. But
it was so interesting, and he was the only person in this book, The Laws of Human Nature, the only time I've ever heard someone articulate these ideas in a way that I wasn't immediately repulsed. And maybe it's because I had some trust with him from like being somebody who engaged with his other books and found value in them, that I take his ideas more seriously when he puts them out there. But I found that he articulated it in a very interesting way, and that the extent to which you can recognize these traits of your personality and then integrate them just make you more creative, more interesting, more having healthier relationships with opposite sex, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because we think of personality or something as just like one thing. It's like my personality is X, but it's not him. It's like Freud and Jung and all these dudes like deconstruct this into like tangible components that you can like operate on, you know?
Yeah, and the idea that personality comes from the Latin word persona, which means mask, and that we have all these different personalities that we show in different times. Oh God, Robert Greene, genius.
Yeah, it's deep. Yeah, he does some etymology in these books that are pretty interesting.
He loves it. He's all about it.
I like this idea, though, that we were talking about earlier, that Jung idea of the animus and the animo, because he was talking about this idea that guys that are super masculine, so like they're the most macho or whatever, man, like they care a lot about their appearance, like they gel their hair and like wear clean clothes and they care a lot. But that's like a feminine idea. So it's like it's like almost like a circle. Like even at the most masculine ends, you have these like super hyper feminine qualities.
Yeah.
And like he's trying to like deconstruct these, and all this stuff was really interesting.
Yeah, he's so good at he's such a brilliant psychologist of human nature. I wish that he would write a fiction book.
Well, he talks about that dude Proust in Mastery that did write a fiction book, because he would just go and put himself in all these crazy social situations and just take notes on everyone and apply it to his characters in these fiction books. And they were so like, they even said that, oh my God, this guy Marcel Proust, or I forget the name of the book that he wrote.
In Search of Lost Time. I tried to read it. I hated it.
Oh my God, it sounds so interesting though, because they were saying like he cared so much about being technically right about his character. So if he wrote about like a gay guy, he would like go to gay brothels and just like observe the gay, and like no one else, like it was like the Da Vinci, like, you know, Da Vinci's trying to write about anatomy, so he like actually dissected horses to see how their nervous system worked, to see which, you know, nerve controlled their jaw muscle and controlled their facial expression, so that he could accurately do them down to the T or whatever. He was doing that. They said when he was about to die, this guy Marcel Proust was on his deathbed and he knew he would die in 2 days, and he's like, oh, this feeling I'm experiencing is actually different than the feeling of death that I wrote for one of my characters. So I have to like go back and write it, you know, like, and that was the last thing he did with his life.
Oh shit, maybe I should reread it.
Yeah, it sounds so awesome. But that idea of, I don't know, just.
I didn't like it though, because when I read it the first time, the main character is such a weenie. He's such a baby, crybaby.
Yeah, because he was in like elitist France or whatever, where like people put powder on their faces and like wore wigs and whatever.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I should probably reread it.
I think
to be honest.
I mean, this is going back to the Laws of Human Nature. We're just talking about the French Revolution, but like that chapter really just messed with me, because the idea that they just guillotined all these people, you know, that were running the country, is just
it's so fascinating,
outstanding.
Man.
Yeah,
and then also the idea that right after that, Napoleon was just able to like go all around Europe, taking over countries and just defeating everybody. It's just so fascinating, because I think that it's why startups give equity to people, because the soldiers in the Revolutionary Army of France had equity in the French nation state, whereas the soldiers of Imperial Russia or Austria didn't. So they were like willing to work way harder. And Napoleon was obviously a brilliant genius, but then he also had like way more committed dudes rolling with him in his crew, squad goals. And I just think that's hilarious. And then also I think one other just hilarious thing about the French Revolution is that they created this Declaration of the Rights of Man, that all men are equal, blah, blah, blah. And then this somehow arrived to Haiti, which was just a slave plantation where they were growing sugar. And people read that there and they're like, oh, dope, so we're free? And they're like, no.
Well,
and then they fought a crazy fucking war, and then like eventually they lost it.
Well, who's that dude in Haiti that like there's like some general in Haiti that's the man that Ben Horowitz always talks about or whatever. Yeah. He's like supposed to be really cool, but whatever. Yo, that reminds me like in the Vietnam War of Ho Chi Minh, and how he like right before the Vietnam War was like, dude, this is so awesome. America's coming to Vietnam. They're the ones that wrote the Declaration of Independence. Yeah. They'll totally respect our autonomy as like our own nation state that can determine its own future. Like, not so much Ho Chi Minh.
To Dude, yeah, it's crazy.
Wait, speaking of this though, while we're talking about Napoleon, you know that awesome painting by Jacques David of Napoleon on a horse, like one of the most badass paintings of all time? We saw it in Vienna at the Belvedere Museum.
Dope.
So good. This is probably one of the best paintings ever painted in history.
Oh, for sure.
And oh man, it's by Jacques David. I forget the actual name of it because the name is quite long.
Oh, Napoleon crossing the Alps or something like that.
No, it's like 5 times longer than that. It's like Napoleon crossing this river at this battle at whatever. But like, it's so awesome. It's in the Belvedere Museum in Vienna.
Yeah.
Oh my god, amazing stumble upon. Just like walking, you see the most
I didn't expect
like
that at all.
badass painting of Napoleon ever.
While we were going to look at Gustav Klimt paintings, which were super dope.
Yeah, Gustav Klimt is the shit. God, those are so good. And
100%.
It's so funny because I look at so many paintings now, like just in Soho at like these art galleries, and it's like, oh, these are cheap like people that saw Gustav Klimt painting and are like, oh, I'm gonna just steal this style. Like,
yeah, totally.
But he just like did this all on his own. It's awesome.
I also love that Gustav Klimt is amazing because he's this kind of bridge between. So, one of my friends was talking about French Impressionism as an art style, like Claude Monet, and just how it's just pretty pictures and completely just vomit-inducing bullshit art.
Wait, Claude Monet?
Yeah.
Monet's fucking amazing.
Is it, though?
Jesus Christ, yes. What the fuck are you talking about?
They're just like pretty pictures of flowers and boats and stuff
They're
like that.
unreal pictures of flowers.
So, okay.
Oh
fine.
my god.
Okay, fine. Like, yeah, they're they're like they're super duper pretty pictures. I agree.
Monet, duh.
But then,
no, Monet is awesome.
Okay, so
don't. Yeah.
all right. But then what came after was all this crazy expressionism and stuff, and just really super psycho stuff. So I'm really into these dudes that came after, who were the generation that grew up during the First World War, or were teenagers during the First World War, and this Roaring Twenties and so on, because those dudes were all like psychologically extremely disturbed from having participated in trench warfare and all this stuff. So if you look at the paintings of Otto Dix, they're just so absolutely psychotic and insane. And the surrealist, and you know, this movie Un Chien Andalous where they cut an eyeball open, it's just so disgusting. I showed that movie to my father and my sister, and they were so offended. They were like, they were just so pissed that I showed that to them without warning them about how crazy it is. But anyway, but Gustav Klimt is kind of a bridge between this totally psycho expressionism, and so I'm not an art historian, but it seems to me that he fills the gap between this impressionist pretty pictures and this expressionism psycho imagery.
Right, because he made awesome pictures, but that had that element in it, but he hybridized them.
Yeah.
And they had some pictures by Klimt in this Belvedere Museum that were not even surrealist. They're just like portraits, and they're amazing.
Yeah,
it's
they're
like,
good.
God, he's so good. Yeah. Oh, man. Riffing on that idea, though. So I learned this on my Hitler tour, that the reason Hitler had that weird mustache...
Oh, yeah, this was interesting.
...was that because he was in the trenches in World War I. He was a messenger. But he, like, apparently didn't actually run out and send messages the way people are. He, like, kind of, like, hid behind the surface. But then he wanted to convince everyone in Germany that he actually was some, like, badass messenger during World War I or whatever. So when they had to wear those gas masks, because Germans started using the mustard gas, they had to shave their mustache. Like, everyone had these badass... Like, if you look at a picture of, like, Otto von Bismarck or Franz Joseph or any of these dudes, they have some badass mustaches. They're massive. But if you wanted to wear these, like, airtight gas masks, you just shave your mustache really, really small. But you still wanted to keep it, so you had these, like, weird, thin mustaches. But then he was, like, trying to convince everyone grew back their mustaches. But he's like, no, I'm trying to convince everyone that I'm, like, very World War I veteran. Right. So he kept the weird mustache. That's why he had it.
That's so interesting.
So interesting. Yeah. I learned a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Did you know that the Nazis had a radio? They built their own radio station, and then they gave everyone in the Third Reich radios, but then they were only tuned to 2 channels, which was the Nazi propaganda stations, which is so interesting of an idea, right? Because like anyone could have their own radio, but they're expensive. So let's just manufacture our own radios, give them to people for free, but they only have our station. But then they at least have a radio versus not having a radio. Awesome idea, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. We should totally read that book about Goebbels.
I totally want to, yeah.
Also, there was this really interesting thing that when I first moved to Cologne, or actually Bonn, is the city I was living in, it's basically Cologne, this movie was so popular called Look Who's Back, is the English translation. Ist wieder da. And it's about Hitler coming back in our modern age. Like, he was, I don't know, cryogenically frozen or some weird thing like this, and he just wakes up in modern Berlin, and he's walking around thinking, what the hell is going on here? And just trying to...
I think what the hell is going
on. Yeah. But it was really popular in Germany. It was like the #1 selling book and movie. And I read the book. I didn't watch the movie. And it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It was interesting to me that was popular there now.
Yeah, I mean, German culture is so interesting to me. I've only done Berlin and Munich, like, on this trip. Like, I've done Berlin before, but now I did Munich, and yeah, I'm upset. Like, Germany is the most interesting country in, like, the world, probably.
China.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I haven't spent enough time there. China and Germany, yeah. But yeah, it's cool that Berlin, like, is the only place that can do this, right? Like, so I heard so many interesting stories from Berlin when I was at DEF CON, because there's people that a lot of hackers live in Berlin now because it's really cheap. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the key, right? Like, this city, it's the largest city in the EU if you don't count London, because they Brexited or whatever. So, largest city in the EU, but it was bombed to smithereens in World War II.
And then divided for 40 years.
And then, communists were in Eastern Berlin until 1990.
Yeah.
Well, like, they've had 20 years of modern economy. So even though it's the largest city in the EU, it's like only 20 years old in a sense.
Yeah.
So it's like everything's still like run down and there's little infrastructure and it's really, really cheap. But they have like so much history of the last hundred. Like, it's like you can't live somewhere that cheap that has that much history anywhere else in the world. It's just that dynamic doesn't exist. And because of that, and they have like super liberal immigration policies. Like, anyone can just like post up there, and like it's. Oh my God, it's so interesting, right? Like, they were saying that people at the clubs now in Berlin, like, they literally have guys that look like Neo in the Matrix, like wearing some like duster and sunglasses that just walk through and then pop out their jacket, and they've just got like drugs, you know, like from the back pages of Pickle, and it's like people don't even like take Molly there; they take like other crazy stuff, and it's just like that experimentation and vibe of like, dude, we fought the Nazis, we fought the communists, like, we just do not care about your world order. We're just doing our own thing. Yeah, it's just not. Dope. It's not anywhere else. Yeah, like, that's just the thing going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
I gotta spend some more time there, but very cool.
Definitely.
What else about Robert Greene?
Dude,
do you
else about Robert
you have other stuff you want to say?
He's so awesome. I can't even think about all this stuff. So, okay, the thing, I've been rereading this book just because usually I hate to reread books because I think that there's so many books in the world that I haven't consumed yet that I want to see them before I revisit another. It's somehow, I feel the same way with cities. I want to travel to, so I've never been to Cape Town or to Florianopolis or whatever. I'd much rather travel to a new city I've never been before than go back to one I have been. So, but with this one, I keep wanting to reread it and come back to it because I get new ideas every time I read it. So the thing that I was just reading about was about grandiosity and narcissism and people's personalities. And I totally have this. And I was just recognizing this character traits in my own self. And then he also makes these interpretations of these bad parts of, or not bad, but destructive parts of your personality, and then how you can, in some way, try and rein them in or use them for productive purposes by channeling them into your work or by externalizing them. Or there's really a lot of good insights about that in there that I was trying to, to apply for myself.
Yeah, I agree with that. The thing that I got out of this book really, like, so it's just like, I mean, there's so many interesting things in the book, but it really, really, really made me think about different personality types, different dynamics and interactions, and how you leverage them in your event. Like he was making a point also that I just remembered about introverts and extroverts, and how introverts naturally do not understand extroverts, and extroverts naturally don't understand introverts. And when he was riffing on this idea, he said so many things that just like made immediate sense to my interactions with people. It's like, introverts naturally think of extroverts as like reckless and stupid because they just like do things with like out and informed and but like extroverts naturally think of introverts as like antisocial and like boring and annoying and it's like unmotivated or whatever. But it's like this barrier is like, it's even more than like men versus women. It's like an introverted man and introverted women will get each other more than like an extroverted man and introverted man. And like, made so much, like, he said so many interesting things in this idea. Going back to the thing you said, you've never been to Cape Town. This is one international city that I actually beat you on. Because, like, in case you don't get this from this podcast, Matt's been, like, everywhere in the world. But Cape Town's awesome because they had a Revolutionary War in 1994. This is so awesome about a city. Like, there's no other city that I can even think of that had a revolutionary war like in the 1990s. That's just like a normal hangout city.
Croatia.
Yeah, but did they like?
Totally.
But everyone fled as like refugees.
I mean, I don't know. I think they had a pretty serious war in the 90s.
Yeah, but like everyone I know, like there are people like in Bosnia too, and like or whatever, Belgrade and Serbia, but like everyone like fled. I feel like, maybe I don't know, but like Cape Town, you go and every single like the cashier at your store will like tell you a crazy story about the revolution. It's like that's such a crazy dynamic.
That's cool. Yeah.
You can just have a city where every single person lived through a revolutionary war. Amazing.
Yeah.
Like. Go check out at the bookstore and hear a crazy story about trying to free Nelson Mandela from Robben Island or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so cool. Yeah, what else was in this book? Wait, I feel like there was more things that I want to say. Ooh, he mentioned this at one point. That was good. When he was doing his etymology riff, that the word invidia means
envy in Latin. Or...
Yeah. No. It means envy in Latin, but it has something to do with an eye. Like,
right.
The word for envy has something to do with eyes because you envy things with your eyes. But then Nvidia, the GPU company, logo is an eye. I never put it together. Yeah, their logo is an eye. So cool.
Huh. That's like a layer 2 realization about that. I only had the layer 1 thing about Nvidia's name.
No, but then their logo's an eye.
It's
so cool.
That's pretty cool.
I really like this idea too that he was talking about. Is just like the reason anyone should care about this is like. This is like an Oscar Wilde quote, which I don't remember. I should write down all the quotes at some point so I can articulate them accurately. Maybe that's an improvement for this podcast. But he was saying like, there's like a joy almost.
I tweeted it.
In the influence of others. There's like a joy in the influence of others. Yeah.
So that Oscar Wilde quote, it's something about to hear your own ideas reflected back to you with the passion of youth or blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And then he goes, there was a real joy in that, perhaps the most satisfying joy left to us in an age so limited and vulgar as our own. An age grossly carnal in its pleasures and grossly common in its aims.
Amazing. Yeah. Because he's saying like, okay, if you're like whatever emo about the nihilism of the world, like everything sucks, blah, blah, blah. It's like there's an actual like primal innate joy in like influencing others into your vision of the world. So it's like you have to do it. You can't just be like some thinker that hates the world. You have to like actually
when you meme things
figure out social existence, and meme them into existence. It's awesome. Like, you have to play the game at a higher level. And
meta. That's what we're doing with this podcast. FYI.
Yeah, totally. Because people will read the books that we talk about.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. What else? What other thoughts? Oh, I have some thoughts about mastery maybe that I haven't articulated yet.
Yeah, let's do it.
I liked this idea that a man of talent should be scolded for learning everything himself. He should devote himself to good masters to learn. I thought this was an interesting idea. That in the early of your career, it's almost like bad not to seek out good mentors. And I think about this too, like one good friend, one good mentor, one, good girlfriend can just impact your life in like a 10x way.
True.
That like it's almost nonsensical not to try to do that early in your career. Like you have to optimize. And he just does all these Wikipedia articles about like people that had good mentors and then like their dynamic with their mentors. And then that's why I feel like this thing, because like I've had this experience through my career trajectory, like people have made undue influences in my life, and like because I never had an older brother, so like there are a lot of people that have served that purpose as like older brothers to me that I thought were awesome. But like you just got to find that early in your career. Totally, don't try to do it all on your own. That's like silly.
Another thing that affected me from Laws of Human Nature was the riff on Flannery O'Connor and death and coming to terms with your mortality and using it to motivate you. So I ordered. As soon as I read that, he referenced some painting, which is a skull and an hourglass and a flower.
That's the Stoic icon.
Yeah, so I bought that painting and I put it in my room, or a reprint of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's on that Memento Mori coin.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, like the Stoics used to do this, right? Like the idea that there should be no negative forces in the world. Like at best, you can turn a negative force into a neutral. So like death. That's pretty bad, right? Like people like die and they never come back. But if you use it for motivation, maybe it's neutral, right? Like,
how abstracted it is in our modern culture, and that we never see death. So we've relegated all the people that died to hospitals, and in the past, in human history, they used to see death all the time. What we were just talking about in World War I, they saw so many people who died and just knew death way more intimately. I have never seen anybody die. I've seen dead people, but never anyone who died.
So you don't get to see the Thestrals at Hogwarts or whatever.
So
Harry Potter reference.
I know, totally. But it's just amazing, right? And so in our modern world, He made the point that we see death all the time in movies, but it's the stupidest, most cartoonist.
Yeah, it's like Deep Blue
cartoonish.
Sea. It's like Samuel L. Jackson, and
Yeah.
then like a giant shark eats him.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
you got it right.
Yeah. And we celebrate it. People are cheering in action movies and stuff, and so that's just fascinating, right? Because it's like we're so petrified of the idea of death that we just engage with it in this cartoonish idiot way. And no one ever really thinks about it. So I thought that was rad. And I was like, yeah, I should think about death more. So it's right hanging in my room that I look at it every morning. And it's right above my desk. So,
Yeah, I ordered one of those coins online it's called thedailystoic.com is a website that like sells stoic merchandise. But they have a coin that says Memento Mori. And then on the backside, it has the skull, the hourglass, and the rose. What is it supposed to be? It's like the flower is life. That the skull is death and the hourglass is time, maybe? I don't know. But it's just like, if you remember that you're going to die and that death is a real thing, like, it motivates you not to put things off, which I think is really good. Like, don't put things off and don't bullshit. Like, you're going to be dead, you know? Like, probably the thing you think matters, like, it's probably not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Like, the only things that matter are, like, the most, like, realist, basic ground truths of the world.
True.
Yeah, and I honestly believe since I've carried that coin around, it's made me more I don't know, maybe more in touch with, like, the reality of how I want to live my life and not this, like, second layer of just, like, social interaction bullshit.
That's cool.
But now I'm going back to the second layer as thinking about it in the Robert Greene terms of how you can, like, leverage it to your advantage.
That's cool.
Cool. What else did I want to say? Oh, he says this idea that the most creative years of your life are in your early 20s to late 40s. That sounds right. So, like, you should maximize your career trajectory to, like, do as much badass shit, like, in terms of creative work in your late 20s to early 40s. I think that's probably right. That's your creative years, so figure out how to optimize that. Oh, I like this other stuff he was talking about, that there's a meme that recurs throughout history about smart people getting sabotaged by their low emotional intelligence. And he does a couple Wikipedia articles on it, like Ben Franklin, who worked at a publishing shop in wherever, Boston for a while. And just, like, got sabotaged by all his coworkers because he was just so much smarter and didn't understand why they don't like him. He's, like, so good at everything. And it's, like, there's just a trope that recurs over and over and over again. The guy that's really smart and good, and then everyone hates him. You know? So it's, like, don't have such low emotional intelligence. Like, actually understand the ecosystem that you're in and use it to your advantage is probably good.
Totally.
All right, cool. What else do you want to say?
I feel like I'm missing a million things that I could possibly say about this
Yeah, but just
book,
read the books. The book's great.
Totally.
Yeah,
That's
like,
the
this is such a
only
good
thing.
book. Yeah, just read it.
Yeah.
I think it's better than Sapiens, honestly.
Me too.
Yeah.
Totally.
All right, I hope he does have another book in him, too. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Cool, dude, it's good to be back.
Yeah.
Good to be podcasting again. Let's go. All right, cool. We'll be back next week with some more book club.
Yeah.
All right, peace out.